Let's move on to this next story. And we were talking about it in Showbiz about Alec Baldwin. Now, I couldn't understand, and I'm sure lots of our viewers and listeners can't understand. So Alec Baldwin is back in court. This is Helena Hutchins, and was killed on the set of this movie Rust. So he's back in court. Judge does all this behind closed doors things, and whammo, next thing we know, it's the case dismissed. What the hell happened?
Well, I'm with you, except I'm going to pick up on just one thing you said. That judge does these things behind closed doors because it can seem that way sometimes. The jury gets sent out and there are these legal arguments. And I give you that. Sometimes it can seem that there's technicalities and things that aren't so clear. There were things that weren't so clear in this case. Prosecution hiding evidence from the defense and the court. And the judge, when she found out, was furious. I've got one case where I've had an experience of that. It was the Serious Fraud Office's biggest ever trial. It was called the Unit Oil bribery case, where the head of the SFO had been tapping up co-defendants in our case secretly without the lawyers, trying to get them to plead guilty. Well, needless to say, her contract wasn't renewed at the SFO, and Suella Braverman announced an independent review at the time. Similarly, in this case, where bullets that could have been key evidence for the defense, certainly the judge agrees, they were, instead of being assigned to that case, were assigned in the evidence locker to a completely different case. And the prosecution said, well, we just decided that wasn't relevant. Wow. Well, I tell you what, it's been found out. And straight away, we've got resignations from the U.S. district, from the district attorney, and we've got a trial by the judge that has been dismissed with prejudice. Not a mistrial, so the jury can hear it another time in another trial. They can't come back. And the judge has even hinted at bad faith. For a judge to say that a lawyer has acted in bad faith or even hint at it is vanishingly rare. Just shows how disgraceful this points to the judge's view of the behaviour of the prosecution.
But Hannah, what does that mean? Because there's Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, 26.
Yep.
Now, she's already serving some time in prison, and if this case had gone correctly, Alec Baldwin could have ended up doing the same jail time. Does it then throw her case into question as well?
It might do. And I'm not Miss Gutierrez-Reed's lawyer, of course. I can tell you this, that we were not in our Unit Oil case with the SFO, we weren't the first people to get out on appeal. But once the lead defendant got out on appeal, it followed. There was a domino effect for the other defendants. And quite rightly, we got out too. But the first thing, I'm sure that Mrs. Gutierrez-Reed's lawyers were looking at this very, very closely, because if this was an aspect of the evidence, these bullets that affected the case as a whole, rather than just Mr. Baldwin's case, well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and they'll be looking to take advantage of it too. And if the prosecution have behaved in the way in which the judge describes and hints at, quite rightly too, no sympathy for them whatsoever.
Wow. Would you have to pay your lawyers? I mean, do the prosecutors even get paid or anything like that if they do something like that? If you've engaged lawyers and they do something that the judge calls out, do you, if they're representing you, do you still have to pay them?
Well, it's an interesting question. So first of all, prosecutors are generally state employees, so they're paid for by the state. I mean, theoretically, if somebody doesn't do their job properly, even if they're a state employee, they can be subject, can't they, to kind of consequences in employment law. What was interesting in our case over in the Old Bailey and then Southwark Crown Court, and what might also be relevant here, is that the prosecution may have to pay costs. And in that case, the costs that had to be paid by the Serious Fraud Office over in the UK, in this case a couple of years ago, they were in the millions, because that's what our client had to pay to defend himself against a prosecution that never should have taken place. Well, I tell you what, lawyers are expensive in England. We know for a fact, don't we, that lawyers in America cost a pretty penny. And I suspect the phrase that Baldwin's lawyers will be using to to the prosecutors, lawyers who they will say have been negligent is, I will sue your ass.